Hands where I can see them. The words cut clean through the polished quiet of the lobby. Not loud, not shouted, but sharp enough to turn heads without permission. Marcus Reed stopped mid-step, one foot still angled toward the glass doors that reflected the late afternoon sun in long, golden streaks across the marble floor. For a second, nothing moved except the faint shimmer of light crawling up the wall behind him, and then slowly, deliberately, he turned. The man standing 10 feet away wore authority like it was part of his skin, pressed uniform, squared shoulders, hand resting just close enough to his belt to mean something without saying it outright. Officer Daniel Hayes. His gaze was steady, practiced, the kind that had already made up its mind before asking a single question. Around them, the air shifted. A woman in heels slowed her stride, her phone lowering just slightly. A man near the reception desk glanced up, then quickly backed down, pretending not to see. The building itself seemed to hold its breath, glass and steel and silence wrapped tight around a moment that felt heavier than it should have. Marcus didn't raise his hands right away. Not because he refused, not because he didn't understand, but because he had been here before. Different street, different city, same look, same assumption, same quiet calculation that reduced him to something smaller than the space he occupied. His fingers flexed once at his side, slow, controlled, before he lifted them just enough to be seen, palms open, empty, steady. The reflection in the glass behind him caught everything. The officer's stance, the slight widening of distance between them, the invisible line being drawn without a word. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his eyes shifted, not toward the officer, not yet, but toward that reflection, as if measuring the scene from the outside, as if confirming what he already knew. He stood there in a simple dark jacket, clean but unremarkable, the kind of clothing that didn't announce anything, didn't demand attention, didn't grant permission either. Just enough to exist. Just enough to be questioned. You're going to need to step away from the entrance, Daniel said, voice calm, almost polite, but anchored in something firmer underneath, something that didn't bend easily. A beat passed, then another. Somewhere above them, an elevator chimed softly, the sound echoing down the corridor like a distant reminder that the world was still moving, even if this moment wasn't. Marcus finally looked at him, not with defiance, not with fear, just with a quiet steadiness that didn't match the situation the way it was supposed to. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, he said, voice low, even, carrying just enough to be heard without pushing against the silence. That was the moment something shifted, not outside, not in the people watching, but in the space between them, subtle and almost invisible, like a crack forming beneath polished stone. Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. His posture didn't change, but his focus sharpened, recalibrating, adjusting to something he hadn't expected. The reflection in the glass caught it all, the hesitation that wasn't hesitation, the tension that hadn't fully surfaced yet. Marcus didn't move. The light continued its slow climb across the floor, brushing the edge of his shoes, tracing upward like time itself was watching, waiting. And for the first time, the question in the room wasn't whether he belonged there. It was whether the man standing across from him was ready for the answer. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted in layers, like pressure building beneath something smooth and controlled, and Marcus could feel it in the way the air pressed faintly against his chest, steady but heavier now, as if the room itself had decided to lean in closer without moving an inch. Daniel Hayes took a single step forward, not aggressive, not rushed, but deliberate, closing just enough distance to make the space between them feel intentional, measured in feet, but understood in something else entirely, something older than rules and newer than doubt. His eyes moved briefly, scanning Marcus from head to toe, not searching for weapons or threats, but for confirmation, for something that justified the instinct already forming in his mind. The jacket, the posture, the calm. It did not fit the expectation he had already constructed, and that was the problem. "Do you have identification on you?" Daniel asked, his voice still even, still controlled, but now carrying a slight edge that had not been there before, something firmer, something that expected compliance rather than invited it. Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he lowered his hands slowly, carefully, making sure every movement was visible, intentional, nothing sudden, nothing that could be misunderstood, because he knew how quickly moments like this could turn not through action, but through perception. His fingers brushed lightly against the fabric of his jacket, not reaching inside. Not yet, just resting there, as if considering the next step with more weight than the question deserved. Behind Daniel, the glass doors reflected the city outside, cars passing, sunlight bouncing off windshields, life continuing in its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet line being drawn just inside the threshold. A man near the reception desk shifted his stance, pretending to read something on his phone, but his eyes flicked up again, drawn back into the moment despite himself. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm, steady, grounded in something that did not match the tension building around him. "I do," he said, simple, direct, without resistance, but without surrender either. Another pause followed, shorter this time, tighter. Daniel nodded once, a small motion, almost imperceptible, but it carried decision with it. "Then I am going to need to see it," he said. The words landed softer than the first command, but heavier in implication, because now it was no longer about presence. It was about proof, about justification, about earning a place that Marcus already occupied. Marcus's eyes held on Daniel for a moment longer, not challenging, not avoiding, just steady, as if measuring not the man, but the moment itself, weighing what it meant, what it revealed, what it repeated. His hand finally moved, slow and controlled, slipping just inside the edge of his jacket, fingers disappearing from view for a fraction of a second that felt longer than it was. The reflection in the glass caught everything again, the subtle tightening of Daniel's posture, the shift of his weight, the way his focus narrowed without him realizing it, preparing for something he could not yet define. Marcus did not rush. He did not speak. He simply reached, the fabric of his jacket folding slightly under his hand, the movement small but precise, as if he had done this before, as if he knew exactly how this moment would unfold even before it began. And somewhere in that quiet, in that controlled motion, the balance in the room tilted just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that if you were paying attention, you would understand that whatever came next was not going to follow the script Daniel thought he was writing. Marcus's hand remained inside his jacket for just a fraction longer than expected, not long enough to alarm, but long enough to stretch the moment into something tangible, something that pressed quietly against everyone watching. The fabric shifted slightly under his fingers, and when his hand emerged, it was not hurried, not defensive, just precise, holding a slim leather wallet worn at the edges, the kind that had seen years of use without ever demanding attention. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he held it between his fingers at chest level, letting it exist in the space between them, as if giving the moment one last chance to settle before moving forward. Daniel's gaze locked onto it instantly, his posture tightening in a way that was subtle but undeniable, his focus narrowing as though everything else in the lobby had faded into the background. The low murmur of distant conversation, the faint hum of air conditioning, even the soft echo of footsteps near the far hallway seemed to recede, leaving only the quiet tension anchored between two men standing less than 10 feet apart. Marcus flipped the wallet open with a controlled motion, the leather folding back to reveal the contents inside, but he did not extend it yet. The gold caught the light first, a brief, unmistakable glint that reflected off the polished marble floor and into the glass behind them, a small flash that did not announce itself. Loudly, but did not need to. It was enough. Daniel's eyes shifted, just slightly, and in that shift, something changed. It was not immediate recognition, not yet, but it was the beginning of it, the moment where certainty began to loosen its grip. Marcus finally stepped forward, closing the distance by a single pace, and held the open badge where it could be clearly seen, steady, unwavering, the insignia framed cleanly against the dark leather. "Internal affairs," he said, his voice calm, even, carrying no trace of accusation, no edge of triumph, just a statement of fact that settled into the space with more weight than any raised voice could have achieved. The words did not echo, but they lingered. Daniel did not reach for it right away. His hand hovered slightly, as if his body had not yet caught up with what his eyes were beginning to understand. The reflection in the glass told the story more clearly than either of them did, showing the slight shift in his stance, the way his shoulders adjusted almost imperceptibly, The way the line he had drawn moments ago no longer held the same shape. A man near the reception desk lowered his phone completely now, no longer pretending to ignore what was happening. The woman in heels had stopped entirely, her gaze fixed on the badge, on the quiet reversal unfolding without spectacle. Marcus held his position, patient, composed, allowing the moment to breathe, not rushing it, not forcing it, because he understood that what mattered was not the reveal itself, but what came after it. Daniel finally took a closer look, his eyes scanning the badge, then the identification beside it, then back to Marcus's face, as if confirming the connection between the two, as if reconciling the version of the man he had assumed with the reality standing in front of him. His jaw tightened again, but this time it was different, less certain, less anchored. The authority he carried had not disappeared, but it had shifted, recalibrated, forced to account for something it had not anticipated. Marcus closed the wallet slowly, the leather folding back into itself with a soft, final motion, and lowered his hand to his side. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The silence that followed was no longer the same silence that had filled the lobby before. It was heavier, more aware, carrying the weight of something revealed and something understood, even if it had not yet been spoken out loud. And in that silence, the question was no longer whether Marcus belonged there. The question had become something else entirely, something that rested now with the man who had tried to decide it for him. Daniel did not speak right away, and that silence stretched longer than any command he had given before, longer than any pause he was used to controlling, because now it was not his to shape. His hand, which had hovered with quiet authority only moments earlier, lowered slowly to his side, fingers relaxing one by one, as if releasing something unseen but significant. The shift was small, almost invisible to anyone who was not paying attention, but in a room built on perception, it changed everything. Marcus remained exactly where he was, shoulders level, breathing steady, his presence no longer questioned but not yet acknowledged in the way it needed to be. The light from the tall windows behind him had moved higher now, catching the edge of his jacket, outlining him in a soft, warm glow that contrasted sharply with the cool, controlled posture Daniel had maintained since the beginning. A faint sound echoed from the far end of the lobby, the distant hum of a revolving door turning, someone entering, someone leaving, life continuing as if nothing had happened, even though something had. Daniel finally cleared his throat, a quiet, restrained motion, more reflex than intention, and when he spoke, his voice carried a different weight, not weaker, but altered, recalibrated. "Mr. Reed," he said, reading the name now not from assumption, but from confirmation, each syllable deliberate, careful. It was the first time he had addressed him directly, not as a presence to be managed, but as a person to be recognized. The difference was subtle, but it landed with quiet force. Marcus gave a small nod, not in submission, not in approval, just acknowledgement, the kind that did not need to be earned because it was already there. Daniel's eyes flicked briefly toward the glass doors, then back again, as if recalculating the scene in his mind, adjusting for variables he had not considered before. The posture he had carried into this moment no longer fit as cleanly, and that realization settled into him in a way that was not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. "I was informed there were concerns about unauthorized access," Daniel continued, his tone measured, controlled, but now carrying a trace of something else beneath it, something closer to explanation than command. The words felt different in the air, no longer a directive, but a justification, a bridge being built after the fact. Marcus listened without interruption, his gaze steady, not dismissive, not confrontational, simply present. "And you acted on that," Marcus replied, his voice even, neither agreeing nor challenging, just stating the obvious in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Another pause followed, shorter this time, but heavier, because now both men understood what had already happened, even if it had not been fully spoken. Behind them, the receptionist shifted slightly in her seat, the faint sound of a chair adjusting breaking the stillness for just a second before fading again. Daniel nodded once, a restrained motion, acknowledging the truth in the statement without fully addressing what lay beneath it. "Procedure," he said quietly, the word landing with less certainty than it might have earlier, as if it no longer carried the same unquestioned authority. Marcus's eyes moved briefly, not away, but across the space, taking in the reflections, the onlookers, the subtle changes in posture and attention, the way the room itself had shifted around them. When his gaze returned to Daniel, it held something calm but firm, something grounded not in status, but in understanding. Procedure does not decide where someone belongs, he said, his voice low, controlled, not raised, not forced, but carrying a clarity that settled deeper than any command. The words did not echo, but they stayed, lingering in the quiet space between them. Daniel did not respond immediately. His jaw tightened slightly again, but this time, there was no resistance behind it, only recognition, slow and reluctant, but real. The line that had once separated them had not disappeared, but it had changed shape, no longer drawn from one side alone. And in that quiet recalibration, standing beneath the shifting light and the watchful reflections of glass and marble, the balance of the moment had fully turned, not through force, not through volume, but through something far quieter and far more difficult to ignore. The word lingered in the air longer than it should have. Procedure, stripped now of its certainty, left exposed in a way that neither man could ignore, and for a moment, Daniel Hayes looked as though he might say something else, something to reclaim the ground he had lost, but nothing came, and that silence said more than anything he could have added. Marcus did not move. He did not shift his weight, did not adjust his stance, did not fill the space with unnecessary words. He simply stood there, steady, composed, allowing the moment to settle fully into place. Around them, the lobby had changed in ways that could not be reversed. The receptionist was no longer pretending to work, her eyes lifted openly now, her posture still, attentive. The man near the column had stopped scrolling entirely, his phone lowered at his side, his gaze fixed on Daniel with quiet curiosity. Even the ambient sounds of the building felt different, as if the usual rhythm had been interrupted and had not yet found its way back. Daniel exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried recognition with it. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. His shoulders dropped just slightly, the rigid line of authority softening in a way that did not diminish him, but changed him, even if only for this moment. Understood, he said finally, the words simple, controlled, but no longer positioned above the situation, instead sitting within it. It was not an apology, not yet, but it was closer to acknowledgement than anything he had offered before. Marcus watched him for a second longer, his gaze steady, measuring not the word itself, but the weight behind it. He had heard words like that before, empty, reflexive, offered without reflection. This one felt different, not complete, but not hollow either. He gave a small nod, acknowledging the shift without amplifying it. Then, without urgency, without making a statement out of it, Marcus took a step forward. Not toward Daniel, not past him yet, but into the space that had been denied to him only moments earlier, claiming it not with force, but with presence. The movement was quiet, almost subtle, but it carried meaning, a silent correction of everything that had been assumed. Daniel did not step in front of him again. He did not raise his hand, did not repeat the command. Instead, he shifted slightly to the side, just enough to clear the path, a small adjustment that spoke louder than any formal gesture. It was not exaggerated. It was not performative. It was simply necessary. The glass doors reflected it all, capturing the precise moment where the line that had once blocked Marcus no longer existed in the same way. As Marcus walked forward, the light followed him, sliding across the polished floor, catching the edge of his shoes, then his jacket, then fading as he moved deeper into the building. His pace was steady, unhurried, each step measured, not to prove anything, but because there was nothing left to prove. Behind him, Daniel remained where he was for a second longer, his gaze lingering, not on Marcus's back, but on the space he had just crossed, as if replaying it in his mind, re-examining the decisions that had led him there. His hand flexed slightly at his side, then stilled, the motion small but telling. The people in the lobby began to shift again, movement returning in fragments, conversations resuming in low tones, footsteps picking up where they had left off. But something had changed beneath it all, something that would not fully disappear, even as the surface returned to normal. Marcus reached the interior doors and pushed them open with a smooth, controlled motion, the hinges barely making a sound. For a brief second, the light from the lobby framed him from behind, outlining his silhouette before he stepped through and let the door close softly at his back. And in that quiet, in that final, almost silent movement, the moment settled. Completely, not with noise, not with confrontation, but with something far more lasting, the undeniable weight of being seen, not as assumed, but as real. The hallway beyond the glass doors felt different the moment Marcus stepped inside, quieter, more contained, as if the noise and tension of the lobby had been sealed behind him along with the reflections and the weight of what had just unfolded. The lighting shifted here, softer, filtered through long panels along the ceiling that cast an even, almost muted glow across the polished floors, stretching ahead in a straight line that seemed to narrow the world into something more focused, more intentional. Marcus did not look back. He did not need to. His footsteps were steady, measured, each one landing with a soft, controlled sound that echoed just enough to remind him of the space around him without filling it. His hand brushed lightly against the edge of his jacket, not checking, not adjusting, just grounding, a small motion that carried familiarity, routine, something practiced over years of walking into places where he had first been questioned before being understood. The air here carried a faint scent of polished wood and cooled air, clean and neutral, the kind of environment designed to feel controlled, predictable, ordered. But Marcus knew better than to mistake appearance for truth. At the far end of the corridor, a set of elevator doors reflected his approach, the metal surface catching his silhouette and stretching it slightly with each step forward. For a moment, he watched that reflection instead of the path itself, seeing not just where he was, but how he was seen, how quickly perception could shift, how fragile it really was. He slowed just slightly as he reached the elevator bank, not stopping, just allowing the moment to breathe before continuing. The call button glowed softly, a small circle of light against brushed steel, and he pressed it once, the contact quiet, almost weightless. The elevator did not arrive immediately. It never did in buildings like this, not when the moment carried weight. Marcus stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, shoulders level, his breathing even, his gaze steady. On the doors in front of him, the stillness was not empty. It was full, layered with everything that had just happened, everything that had been said without being spoken. Behind him, faint through the sealed doors, the lobby sounds began to return, distant and muted, like a memory already starting to fade. A soft chime broke the quiet, and the elevator doors slid open with smooth precision, revealing a mirrored interior that reflected him back in full, not distorted now, not stretched, just clear. He stepped inside without hesitation, turning slightly as the doors began to close, the narrowing gap framing the hallway behind him for just a second longer. In that brief moment, the light from the corridor met the softer glow inside the elevator, blending, then separating again as the doors sealed shut with a quiet finality. The space inside was smaller, enclosed, the air cooler, the hum of the building more noticeable now, a low vibration beneath the surface that most people ignored. Marcus reached forward and pressed a button near the top of the panel, his finger steady, the number lighting up in a soft amber tone. The elevator began its ascent almost immediately, smooth and controlled, the subtle shift in gravity barely noticeable unless you were paying attention. Marcus exhaled slowly, not from relief, not from tension, but from recognition, the kind that comes when a moment settles fully into place. His reflection in the mirrored wall met his eyes, and for a second, he held that gaze, not searching for anything, just acknowledging it. The man in the reflection looked the same as he had minutes ago, same jacket, same posture, same quiet presence. But the space around him had changed, and that was enough. The numbers above the door began to climb, one by one, each soft chime marking movement, progress, continuation. And in that steady rise, carried upward through steel and silence, the weight of what had happened did not disappear. It transformed, settling into something quieter, something deeper, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood. The elevator continued its steady climb, each floor marked by a soft chime that echoed gently in the enclosed space, a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, as if giving Marcus time to let the moment settle deeper rather than fade away. The mirrored walls held his reflection from every angle now, not distorted, not fragmented, but multiplied, surrounding him with quiet versions of himself that all carried the same calm expression, the same grounded stillness. He did not look away. He did not shift his stance. Instead, he let the silence remain intact, uninterrupted, allowing the weight of everything that had just happened to fully arrive without rushing past it. His hand rested loosely at his side, fingers relaxed, no tension, no urgency, just presence. The low hum of the elevator system vibrated faintly beneath his feet, subtle but constant, a reminder that movement was happening even when it could not be seen. The numbers above the door continued to rise, each one lighting up in sequence, marking distance not just in floors, but in transition from one moment into another. Marcus's eyes lowered briefly, not in thought, not in hesitation, but in acknowledgement, as if recognizing something internal that did not need words to exist. Then he looked back up, meeting his own gaze again in the reflection, steady and unchanged. Outside the elevator, the building passed by in silent layers, offices, hallways, spaces filled with conversations and decisions that moved forward without ever noticing the moment that had just taken place below. But inside this small enclosed space, that moment had not disappeared. It had shifted, becoming something quieter, something that stayed. The elevator slowed almost imperceptibly, the motion softening before coming to a controlled stop. A final chime sounded, slightly higher in tone, signaling arrival. The doors began to slide open with smooth precision, revealing a different kind of space beyond, one that felt more private, more intentional. The lighting was warmer here, less reflective, more grounded. The floor beneath the doorway was darker, textured, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. Marcus stepped forward without hesitation, crossing the threshold in a single, fluid motion, his pace unchanged. As he entered the corridor, the elevator doors closed behind him with a quiet finality, sealing away the mirrored reflections and the contained silence he had just left. The hallway ahead was still, lined with closed doors and soft lighting that created long, even shadows along the walls. There were no onlookers here, no quiet observers pretending not to watch, no subtle shifts in posture or attention. Just space, just stillness. Marcus walked forward, his footsteps muted against the carpeted floor, each step absorbed rather than echoed, as if the building itself was now listening differently. At the end of the corridor, a set of double doors stood closed, simple in design but unmistakably significant, the kind that marked transition from one level of access to another. He slowed slightly as he approached, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, recognizing the quiet importance of the moment without needing to dramatize it. His hand reached forward, fingers resting briefly against the cool surface of the door, feeling the solid weight beneath his touch. For a second, he paused, not long enough to be seen as uncertainty, but long enough to acknowledge the path that had led him here. Then, with a steady motion, he pushed the door open. The hinges moved smoothly, almost silently, revealing the space beyond, and as Marcus stepped through, the light shifted again, welcoming him not as someone questioned, not as someone passing through, but as someone exactly where he was meant to be. The room beyond the doors carried a different kind of silence, not empty, not uncertain, but deliberate, the kind of quiet that exists in places where decisions are made and consequences are understood without needing to be spoken out loud. The lighting was warmer here, casting a steady glow across a long conference table of dark polished wood, its surface reflecting just enough light to reveal the outlines of the people seated around it. Conversations had been happening before Marcus entered, low voices, measured tones, but they stopped the moment the door opened, not abruptly, not dramatically, but in a way that felt controlled, as if everyone present had learned how to pause without drawing attention to it. Marcus stepped inside and let the door close behind him with a soft, muted click that settled into the room like punctuation. His presence did not announce itself loudly, but it was immediately recognized, not because of how he entered, but because of who he was. At the far end of the table, a woman in a tailored gray suit looked up first, her posture straightening slightly as her eyes met his, a flicker of acknowledgement passing across her face before she gave a small nod. Others followed, subtle shifts in attention, quiet recognition moving around the table like a wave that did not need sound to travel. Marcus walked forward at the same steady pace he had carried from the lobby, his footsteps absorbed by the carpet beneath him, each step deliberate but unforced. He did not rush to fill the silence, did not speak to claim the room, because the room had already shifted to receive him. As he reached the side of the table, he placed a slim folder down with a controlled motion, the soft sound of paper against wood drawing just enough focus to anchor the moment. He rested his hand lightly on the edge of the table for a second, grounding himself not out of uncertainty, but out of presence, before lifting his gaze to meet the others fully. The woman at the head of the table leaned forward slightly, her voice calm, professional, carrying authority without needing to raise it. "We have been expecting you," she said. The words simple but clear, and in that moment, the contrast with what had happened downstairs settled into the room without being named. Marcus gave a small nod, acknowledging not just her words, but the space he now occupied, one that had always been his, regardless of who had questioned it. "I apologize for the delay," he replied, his tone even, controlled, offering the statement not as an excuse, but as a matter of fact. A man seated to the right glanced briefly toward the door, then back at Marcus, as if aware that something had occurred beyond this room, something they would not need to ask about to understand. The woman at the head of the table did not press for explanation. She simply nodded once and gestured lightly toward the empty seat near her. A quiet invitation that required no emphasis. Marcus moved to the chair and sat down with the same measured control, placing both hands on the table in front of him, fingers relaxed, posture upright, but not rigid. The room settled again, but differently this time, not waiting, not questioning, but aligning. The folder he had placed remained unopened for a moment, its presence enough to signal purpose, direction, weight. Outside the tall windows lining one wall, the city stretched out under late afternoon light, buildings catching the sun in sharp angles, reflections moving slowly as the day continued. Inside, time felt more contained, more focused, as if everything in the room had narrowed to what would happen next. Marcus finally opened the folder, the pages inside neat, organized, precise, and as he did, the room leaned in, not physically, but in attention, in readiness. And in that quiet, controlled space, where voices were measured and authority did not need to prove itself, the earlier moment in the lobby did not disappear. It remained, not as interruption, but as contrast, a silent reminder that belonging was never determined at the door, but revealed in what followed. The room did not erupt into noise after the folder opened. It settled deeper into focus, each person at the table leaning not with movement, but with attention, their eyes tracking the pages Marcus turned with calm precision, the soft sound of paper sliding against wood carrying more weight than raised voices ever could. He did not rush through the contents, did not fill the space with unnecessary explanation, instead allowing the information to exist as it was, clear, structured, undeniable. The woman at the head of the table read in silence for a moment, her expression controlled, but her eyes sharpening slightly as they moved line by line, absorbing details that required no interpretation. A man to her left adjusted his glasses, his posture shifting forward by an inch, drawn in despite himself, while another tapped a pen lightly once against the table before stilling it completely, as if realizing even that small sound did not belong in this moment. Marcus rested his hands lightly on either side of the open folder, fingers relaxed, not claiming control of the room, but anchoring himself within it. The light from the windows had softened now, the angle of the sun lower, casting longer shadows across the table, stretching between the people seated there, connecting them in a quiet, unspoken way. Outside, the city continued to move, cars passing, reflections shifting, but inside, everything felt contained, deliberate, steady. The woman finally looked up, her gaze meeting Marcus's again, this time without the initial assessment, without the need to measure or confirm. It was recognition, direct and complete. She gave a small nod, not exaggerated, not formal, just enough to acknowledge both the work in front of her and the person who had brought it. "This aligns with what we suspected," she said, her voice low, even, carrying authority without strain. The words did not surprise Marcus. He had expected them, not because of confidence alone, but because he understood the process, the pattern, the way truth revealed itself when given space to be seen. He nodded once in return, a simple acknowledgement, no more, no less. There was no need for explanation beyond that. Around the table, the others shifted slightly, not in discomfort, but in recalibration, adjusting their understanding, their positions, their next steps. A decision was forming, not spoken yet, but present, moving quietly through the room like a current beneath still water. Marcus closed the folder slowly, the pages coming together with a soft, final sound that marked the end of one moment and the beginning of another. He did not look around to gauge reactions, did not seek validation in expressions or posture. He simply sat, steady, composed, allowing the silence that followed to settle fully. It was not empty. It carried resolution. After a few seconds, the woman leaned back slightly in her chair, her hands folding together on the table, her posture relaxed but assured. "We will move forward," she said, the statement clear, decisive, leaving no room for uncertainty. No applause followed, no visible reaction beyond small, contained nods from those around the table. That was not how decisions like this were marked. They were recognized in stillness, in understanding, in the quiet alignment of purpose. Marcus stood then, not abruptly, not drawing attention, just rising with the same measured control he had carried from the beginning. He gathered the folder, holding it at his side, his movements efficient, unforced. The chair slid back into place without sound as he stepped away from the table. For a brief moment, he paused, not long enough to interrupt the flow of the room, but long enough to acknowledge where he was, what had just been done, what had been confirmed. Then he turned and walked toward the door, his steps steady, unhurried, the light from the windows following him in long, quiet lines across the floor. As he reached the door, his hand rested briefly against it, the cool surface grounding, familiar. He opened it with a smooth motion and stepped through, the door closing softly behind him, sealing the room once more into its controlled quiet. The hallway outside was still, unchanged, but Marcus carried something different now, not visible, not announced, but present. And far below, beyond walls and floors and distance, the earlier moment in the lobby remained, not as a confrontation, not as a disruption, but as a quiet turning point, one that did not need to be revisited to be understood. Because in the end, nothing had been proven that was not already true. It had simply been seen.